Today's session is also brought to you in conjunction with our partners in Denmark, which is Fluid. We're delighted to have them helping us with this webinar. I think the subject of AI is an amazing example of how technology just gets faster and faster. Those of us who've been in distance learning for quite a while will recognize how a technology comes along and then it takes a while, it gets adapted and it becomes mainstream. AI seems to have speeded up that process. It seems that we are actually going faster and faster. And when I think about the fact that last year we had the EADL Innovation Awards and we had 3 really good winners that were all examples of how AI had been used in learning. So I think today's exercise is going to be really interesting to see where it's taking us and what some of the good things are and what some of the pitfalls and perhaps some of the dangers. So welcome to everybody, and I'd like to hand you over to our moderator, Christos, who will take you through.
Thank you, John. A very warm welcome to everyone. From me, my name is Christos Hadjiyannis. I'm the Dean at CIM Cyprus Business School, and I'm a member of EADL's Research and Development Committee. We are delighted to be launching the first of our series of 3 webinars that run under the general theme of redefining learning, and one cannot think about current developments in learning education and not also think about AI. We are honored and grateful to be working alongside Fluid. So a very warm welcome both to EADL members, Fluid members, and of course to everybody else joining this webinar. Our speaker is Charlotta Hill, who is a university lecturer and associate professor in pedagogy at Abo Academy University in Finland. Charlotta has been working for many years on didactics and digital spaces. She has contributed to the development of hybrid and distance education and is currently involved in research on generative AI in education through 2 different projects, Nordic Ed AI and Co-Write. Today, Charlotta Hill will be speaking to the question of what does AI do to learning. So I will invite Charlotta to share her thoughts and research with us. Please take notes, mark down your questions as we go along, and at the end of Charlotta's presentation, we'll have what I'm sure will be a very productive and generative discussion. So Charlotta, over to you.
Thank you so much. And thank you for the introduction. I was at first when I was asked to give this lecture, I thought that, well, why should I talk about AI? I'm not an expert on AI. I'm not even an expert on learning. I'm a teacher and researcher, and I'm very interested in what digital technologies do to education and to teaching and also studying processes. So I think today will be more perhaps a sketch of some thoughts I have, because this is really a field that is difficult to follow. I think every day I see a new and interesting study on AI. It's I think when John talked about the fast-pacedness of technologies and perhaps AI, I'm not so sure it's that fast-paced. I mean, people who have been working with AI talk about a development over 50, 60 years, perhaps even more, depending on how far back you want to go. But to those who use it today, it might seem like it is very fast. But I also think that the discussion and debates on AI in education are pretty productive at the moment, and there are so many good and interesting researchers who also bring up the critique. I felt like when digitalization sort of struck us 30 years ago, we weren't really having these kind of discussions. There was a very sort of limited critique on what digitalization was doing in education and doing to education. But now it seems like AI is really sort of pushing emotions and creating sort of a force field that people have to somehow comment or somehow think about. And I think even if you don't care about AI, you probably think about it to some extent. And in education, we always have the role of preparing students for a future. And digital technologies are a part of that future, but we don't know to what extent that is. You are very welcome to share comments and questions throughout the lecture. I would like to hear more from the participants and what you're thinking. I've been interested in distance education and hybrid education for several years, and I think when we talk about AI, if you go to a distance educator, you will probably have several good ideas and suggestions for how to improve your teaching, because distance educators are always working with and against technologies like AI. And I'm quite sorry that I haven't been working that much with distance education lately. I've been more focused on AI these past years. But distance education and hybrid education, that is to me almost synonymous. If you're going to do hybrid, you need to think like a distance teacher. So I'm going to talk, when I talk about distance education, I also mean hybrid education. Now, let's see, I'm going to share the presentation, and I hope it looks okay to you.
Yes, it does.
Thank you. The topic is, what does AI do to learning? And I thought it was quite interesting because AI is not, as you know probably by now, AI is not a very clear-cut concept. I mean, AI can be many different things, and AI is often used today to sell a product. People think it's it's sellable, basically. And then we have learning. And learning, I mean, does learning actually change? I was wondering and was thinking about this title, and is it actually learning that AI is changing, or is it something else? Is it the conditions for studying? Is it the conditions for gaining or not gaining information? I don't know. So as you can hear, I'm not going to be providing you with a lot of answers. I think I'm very much searching right now, because from a research perspective, we don't know very much about AI and learning, at least not with these large language models and generative AI that we talk about today often. But I still want to start with perhaps a more critical perspective on all of this, because when we talk about learning theories, we can choose many different perspectives, and I know you know this. But it also matters if you're interested in a cognitive or a sociocultural or even a socio-material perspective, because you give more or less agency to the digital resources or the digital actors, like, for example, AI. And I usually work much with socio-material theories, and when we usually also see this entanglement of humans and AI as something that they both shape each other. But AI is, it is an agentic force in education. But the problem is, AI is based on statistical and mathematical predictions, as you know, and also the training models and the data and the information it has been trained on. So we have an issue here, because when we talk about education, we have a lot of educational values and theories and relations between, for example, teachers and students that we cherish and we think are important. But with AI and with a lot of digital technologies, we are sort of outsourcing these type of relationships to AI. And I was actually quite impressed with Wikipedia that came with a fairly clear ban on AI for different reasons. And as you can see, you can still use AI to translate and to make smaller edits, but it's not, AI should not be used to create content. And somehow I kind of wish education could be this clear as well. Because I think most of us feel like, well, we can't really ban it because it's there and students are using it. But I mean, if we're honest, what are the learning gains of using AI? So, and just to provide you a very short historical perspective, I thought that Audrey Waters, she's got a really good book on teaching machines, and she goes back to the 1900s and how these arguments about teaching machines are very similar to the ones that we see later when digital learning environments come around. And it's all about personalized learning, feedback, and automated grading. And this is, to me, this is interesting because what is it that a teacher does? I mean, if, let's say, a machine can do all of this, so what is then teaching? It sounds like automated grading is sort of, this boring, horrible task that you sort of have to get through. But grading is a part of what you do as a teacher. The same goes for feedback. The same goes for talking to your students and trying to understand them. So this is interesting for different reasons. It's interesting because we see the same arguments coming on over and over again, but we see very little evidence of this actually happening. Because personalizing learning, providing feedback, and providing grades is a really complicated and relational task. But I don't know if you agree with me. Feel free to jump into the chat if you want to. But if we think about the feedback argument, I'm not going to go through all of these. I'm not an expert in these type of things, but I started thinking about feedback. Feedback is something we often, especially in distance education. I remember when I've collaborated with distance educators, we often talk about, well, feedback is important, but I mean, it's also a huge workload for teachers. So we need to think about when is feedback important and meaningful, for example. What we see from research is that, yes, AI offers instant feedback, and interestingly, it provides a safe space for questions. So students, they don't feel judged. And this is, of course, interesting for different reasons. I think it's a bit, maybe not wholly unexpected, but also a bit problematic that students don't necessarily feel they have a safe space for questions. I mean, why is teaching and learning together somehow problematic, and asking questions, well, why would that be problematic? But so there's something about the relations between teachers and students that AI is sort of stepping into that it makes me a little uncomfortable. I think it would be really important that students can ask these questions to their classmates and to the teacher, for example. But yes, this is what we can say. So AI can actually be a motivating and important space for students and for feedback. But what a lot of studies seem to conclude is that students still prefer human feedback. So, I mean, one didactic question would be, well, how can AI complement human feedback practices? How could this be done? And I wanted to share this. It's from the same article from before by Winston et al. But I thought it was quite interesting when they looked at feedback as as a relational practice, and in an age of generative artificial intelligence. And here you see things like, well, feedback is not process corrective comments. It's a relational practice. Feedback can be messy, it can be uncomfortable and challenging and joyous. And I mean, this is, I think all teachers recognize this, that some students are very open to feedback, but then you have students who actually need to be more open to feedback. They are not developing as much as they could, and they might actually be quite resistant to feedback. So, I mean, best case scenario, AI can provide some kind of feedback that helps students. But I think the worst case scenario is that students never really get the kind of feedback that challenges them. Rather, they go to AI to get those, comfortable, friendly, soft comments that they don't really take seriously. And then we have the question of ethics. I mean, it is an ethical practice, how we treat students, how we provide feedback, how we behave towards students, how much time we invest and provide for them. And if actually feedback is promoting learning over time. And these kind of feedback practices should ideally be designed with learners and educators. But how often do we do this as teachers? And then the seventh point is always, tricky because it requires time and care. So, and a lot of teachers are feeling a lack of time, and they probably care about their students, but they might not have the time. So we are sort of pushed to use AI because we don't have time. But I mean, the problem is we don't have time, and we should have the time for education, So I think AI is perhaps not the problem here. It's the resources, the conditions we have for teaching and for feedback. And the eighth point, that we should be focusing on learning, not efficiency or compliance. So, what type of feedback do our students need from us? That would be an interesting question to consider. And perhaps also creating that kind of time to provide feedback, and maybe doing less of something else, and more of feedback, if feedback is sort of the thing that we wanna do in education. And point 9 is really, I think, is kind of a very sort of clearly stated, that feedback can actually be enhanced by digital technologies. I'm sure most of us have realized this, but digital technology do not always enhance feedback. So, I mean, just putting AI into this situation doesn't necessarily make it better in any way. And more feedback is not necessarily better for learning. So there has to be some kind of qualitative assessment here. And I think this is the thing that teachers do, that we realize that, okay, so the student need feedback, but I'm not seeing the progress. So I need to change my feedback strategies to make sure that students actually understand and learn what I want them to learn. But anyway, that was an example about how to start to think about, for example, feedback practices. And I decided not to go too into this whole AI and learning, because I think by now most people know a lot of these things. You've probably heard of cognitive offloading, outsourcing, where students are basically just, well, they're telling AI to do things that they should be doing. And that can be summarizing a text, it can be writing a paper or something like that. And what we see, not surprising exactly, but the learning gains are reduced and students have a weaker knowledge as a result. And I mean, I don't know about you, but I feel like this has been an issue for a while now, that learning is always sort of connected to some kind of efficiency idea that, oh, well, thanks to digital technologies, you have access to information anywhere, everywhere, and somehow that is supposed to, create knowledge. But of course, that doesn't create knowledge. Knowledge is something that happens while you engage with content and while you think about it. And interestingly, AI can help organize, structure, critique texts, for example. They can help focus studying, best case scenario. But perhaps the problem with all of these discussions is that it places very much focus on the student, how they use AI. And, we have all these prompting strategies, and we have to talk about AI literacies or whatever. But what is equally important, to me at least, is that we have platforms that are pushing AI. I don't know what platforms you use, but at my university we have Microsoft, and suddenly a couple of months ago, Copilot started, mixing my Teams messages up, and it wanted to help me improve messages, and it tried to involve itself into my writing in different ways. And I didn't want it there. I didn't want it. But I mean, it's really difficult sometimes also to actually refuse AI because it is everywhere right now. So I think talking about the platforms is also important, and not just focusing on students and getting sort of lost in the whole, what are students doing and what are they doing wrong and what are they doing right, but what are the platforms and what do they entail, and what do they support and what don't they support. And when I looked at a specific article specific to distance education, and this is true for any education really, but I thought it was interesting to read up a bit about what's going on in distance education. So what these authors say was that there is obviously the bias in data, and unfortunately, even though AI is supposed to help with identifying risks of dropouts and things like that, the algorithms seem to disadvantage minority students. So this is a huge problem, and it's an equality issue. And then again, we also see that students might over-rely on AI and might not become good critical thinkers and independent learners. And I mean, this is so important. I mean, in any education, but particularly in distance education, because you need to be independent there. And then the concerns regarding data privacy and security. And I thought it's always interesting about these AI discussions, what is the role of humans in education in the future? And I think I would like to discuss that with you after my presentation, but I'm gonna just continue with it for now. But if you have any comments on this and how you see distance and hybrid education in, let's say, 5, 10, 15 years, I would like to hear from you. And this is, again, one of those studies that are focusing on distance education. And I mean, not surprisingly, distance education often depends on different digital platforms for administration, for assessment, for communication. But what often then happens is that AI becomes embedded in these. Like I said, I mean, I'm forced to have a Copilot in Teams because that's what we use. But I'm not sure it provides much of anything, to me at least. It's more of an annoyance. But when you look at what the authors raise, like the data security, data collection, user consent, ethical standpoint, and compliance with regulation, and I mean, all of this is, again, focusing very much on what these companies, these AI companies, what they're doing, and what the platforms, what they're doing to higher education or to education. But I mean, what can we do to resist this? What can we do to refuse these type of perhaps hurtful and capitalist notions that students and teachers are just data generators, more or less? So that is I thought the picture was quite good to keep in mind if you're a distance educator provider or an educational provider of some kind. And then the unethical aspects of AI, and I mean, again, I'm sure most of you have heard of this, but I mean, when I started teaching and we started using, for example, Google and Google's Collaborator. I started teaching in 2006, and I mean, it feels like a lifetime ago. And I felt like it was a huge thing to have documents where we could collaborate. And obviously, Google is a global company and have impacted the sustainability and energy resources in different ways. But now with AI, I personally become really scared of what this is, where this is heading, because these type of AI technologies are often so very resource intensive. So not only do they provide hallucinations and fake references, fake information, biased information, racist information, and so on, but they also build on this kind of affective engagement where users are constantly drawn back into chatting with these chatbots. And then the copyright violations, they steal data and texts and publications from and works from different people to train the data, and they don't pay for this. They don't pay people who work with AI. We have the global South. We have Africa and South America that are often used to train AI models for very low salaries, for unethical working conditions. And then the unsustainability in the systems. Everything seems to boil down to data centers for some reason. Why are everybody so eager to build data centers that are often placed in regions with drought and lack of water, or insufficient electricity? And I mean, there are also economists who say that the whole AI bubble is definitely about to burst, because they are just loaning these insane amounts of money to build these type of data centers that no one knows if they're actually gonna pay any kind of dividend in the future. So when I think about these ethical implications of AI, I find it really difficult as a teacher to just sort of say that, well, you can use AI if you want to. I often feel like I have to tell students, and we need to talk about how unethical AI is and how hurtful it is to humans, to nature, to also to other to students and their knowledge processes. But I don't know. I mean, it's I talked about this with my colleagues in I teach higher education pedagogy courses, so I meet a lot of my colleagues, and they were like, well, but there are so many unethical things in the world, so it's hard to focus only on AI. But I mean, I think this is one of the huge issues with AI, that it's just so unethical. And unless we get more ethical models, better models for education, then I find it difficult to see a future with them in education. But I look forward to your comments. I'm sure there are diverse opinions on this. when I've been teaching and talking to students and colleagues this year, and interestingly, sometimes AI pops up in our discussions, and I wanted to take this as just an example. I teach bachelor and master students, and one of my bachelor students talked to me last week about what she wanted to write in her bachelor's thesis. And she came. It's funny because she came with her computer and she had her chat with AI there, and she said that, well, look at this. What do you think about these suggestions? So I was sort of involved in her conversation with AI, and I had to tell her that, well, I didn't think those suggestions were useful for her bachelor's thesis, because she was supposed to do a literature review, and she was, needed to focus it in a different way. But for students, this is quite normal to go to chatbots and ask them, so what do you think I could write about? And then they share that with me and perhaps with other teachers. And I had a master's student who was asked me almost the same thing, but she had grounded theory as an example from AI, and she was thinking about that a lot and said that, well, do you think, what is grounded theory? Do you think I could use grounded theory in my master's thesis? And I had to say that, no, I don't think you should use grounded theory. It's really complicated. And that's not, I mean, it's not untrue, but there is something like grounded theory, but it's not really suitable for what you're supposed to do in your master's thesis. And I mean, we know this because generative AI and large language models, they don't have the contextual information to provide this type of feedback to students. But it just shows me and tells me something about how AI is sort of creeping into your teaching practice, even if you're not actively getting involved yourself in it. And I mean, you've probably heard of these librarians who now have to spend a certain amount of time in their work day to find references that AI has hallucinated or just fabulated. And then I had a conversation last week with a colleague who said that they've had a pretty good assignment for teacher students, and where they have to read the curriculum, and then they have to analyze a picture book and create a lesson and a plan for teaching. And she said that, well, it's so obvious that they're using generative AI because it provides them examples from the Swedish curriculum. And I work in Finland, and we have a completely different curriculum, I can tell you. And she was really she wasn't, I mean, yes, we talked about it, but she was really almost thinking aloud to herself that, I mean, this is a good assignment. It works. And I agreed. I think it's a really good assignment. But because they have this situation that more and more students are using AI to submit it, she started thinking that, well, what am I supposed to do now? I mean, do we really need to go back to on-site paper and pen and paper assessment, or what are we supposed to do? And I think this is something that a lot of teachers are struggling with right now. Because it's not necessarily the assessment or the assignments that's wrong. It's just that too many students aren't really engaging with the content we teach in a way they need to become better teachers. So I mean, I'm all for not talking too much about AI or letting it take too much time. But I mean, I think this is definitely something that we probably need to, like, researchers usually say, we need to involve students in these discussions, because what does it mean to be a teacher today? I mean, is it really that simple to outsource a lesson plan to AI? In a small study that I did, I looked at students gave presentations on a historical topic, and they were encouraged to use generative AI. But what I became very attentive to was the fact that they hesitated a lot. And I could see this in the oral presentations, but also in their digital presentations, where they were unsure of how to engage with AI, but also to know what is actually the historical fact in this case, because they don't trust AI, but they don't know really how to judge what AI, the output of AI. And this made me think that we really need to be sensitive to these type of hesitations, because in these situations we can open up what it means to know something and what it means to not know something, or search for knowledge. So that's why I also say that I'm not really sure where I stand at the moment, because students are using generative AI quite a lot, but they don't seem to know what to do with generative AI. And they might not realize what generative AI is doing with them either. But I don't have research on that at the moment. But I think that generative AI in my study, and in this case, it actually could help with formatting issues in PowerPoint, for example, or aesthetic matters, to create a more aesthetic presentation. And it seemed to provide quite good overviews for students, somehow alleviating some of the problems when they tried to understand what they were supposed to study, and how to approach these historical thinkers that we went through during the course. But I think with AI there is something else brewing here. Something else is going on that we need to talk more about. What to include if you include AI, and when can you include AI? Because in my study, it was clear that students went to the course books to get more trustworthy information, and that's a good thing. So I don't think that students are necessarily trusting AI completely and just outsourcing all of their cognitive abilities. I think they are using a lot of different resources to study and to work with whatever they're studying. But AI does create some kind of new epistemic hesitation, I would say, among students. And perhaps there's also another. I published in a special issue. It's a Danish journal, and there's also other pieces on AI and generative AI in education. So please check out the special issue if you're interested. But I thought it was interesting to think about. I mean, how often do we allow for this kind of trial and error thinking by including both online and on-site assessment and oral and written assessment, and becoming more open to this kind of uncertainty that AI often creates among students. So I don't know. It's there's something here that I would like to continue exploring. And one of the projects that I'm involved in now is the co-write project, which is focused on academic writing and collaborative academic writing. And what we see is that students collaborate with several actors when they write. So that can be digital resources like dictionaries, but it can be also chatbots, supervisors, parents, friends, course books. And this is a very multifaceted and let's say dynamic process, because they're also moving between different places and spaces like home, campus libraries, and trains and so on. But what we do see is that chatbots definitely provide a range of things for the students, both ideas, structure, meaning, feedback, and encouragement. And often students talk about this encouragement, like they're struggling to know how to write, what to write, and then they go to the chatbot and they get some kind of confirmation and encouragement from that. They can also get it from their mother or father, but there's some kind of affective engagement here that is driving them to use AI. And there's a link to the project if you're interested. But I want to wrap it up now, and so we have time for discussion. My take would be that we do need to think about these trusting relationships, because one of the issues now is that we are sometimes talking about students like they are thieves or plagiarizers or these horrible people who are using AI wrongly, although we don't really know why and how and when they can use AI, and a lot of guidelines are very unspecific or very sort of, they're both saying that you should use AI to learn more about it, but then they say, well, you shouldn't use AI if it impedes your learning. But I mean, how do you know that? I mean, that's really difficult. So there's a lot of issues here, but from a pedagogical perspective, a didactic perspective, I think these trusting relationships are so important, and they need to be nourished so that students feel that assessment, feedback, support is there for them, and that all students have access to this assessment, feedback, and support. Because there is always the looming threat of, some students who are better off. They might have parents and supervisors, or just a strong network around them who can support them. They get more of that, while there are some students who don't have those kind of networks. They don't maybe have money to buy the latest chatbots or get a tutor or something like that. So this type of trusting relationships and offering them to all students is important. But also, I mean, how often do we create these safe spaces to discuss difficult topics and solutions to assignments? It can include AI, but it doesn't have to be only AI. And then, what I see from the projects and studies I've done so far, and what I've read, is that students are constantly looking for feedback, insights, and explanations. And they want these type of discussions, and we need to consider how we can support these in different locations, like online or on site. And I think best case scenario is that AI can actually help us question and critique practices that are not really meaningful or relevant anymore. I mean, I was surprised at some point when I talked to my students in higher education about how many essays they write. And I thought that, well, I mean, why do you write so many essays? I mean, that can't be the only way to assess knowledge. And I mean, I've done a small historical study where we've looked at higher education and academic writing, and what we find is that oral traditions was the go-to way of assessing knowledge for a really, really long time. This goes back to Plato and Aristotle. But I mean, writing has become such a big deal in education, and now when generative AI can do a lot of writing, we become almost hysterical about it. But I mean, there are different ways to assess what students know, and we need to also consider the temporal matters. How many assignments are we assigning the students? Is this doable for the students? Because what we see from a lot of research is that the amount of assignments and the deadlines, for example, they can create initiatives to use more AI if you're pressured by time. But yes, let's I'm gonna stop here now and bring in questions.
Thank you very much, Charlotta, for that wonderfully honest and open and thought-provoking presentation. We've got about 15 minutes for questions. I'd like to invite everyone to type a question if you'd like, or raise your virtual hand, and then we can bring you into the conversation. But if I may start with a question for you, Charlotta, but also for everyone else as well. It seems to me that we is AI, the introduction of AI in our lives, such a paradigm shift that we need to change. Like it encourages or pushes us to change the way we think about education, and the way we think about learners, and the way we think about teachers. And I was struck by some of the questions you posed, and some you've answered, and some you deliberately left unanswered, which is, questions like, what are the learning gains of using AI? What is a teacher? What is a learner? And I hope, that we will continue to have teachers and learners, and the drive to learn, and a desire to challenge ourselves. But I do sometimes wonder whether I'm just unable to think about the future of education, just because we cannot fathom a future where we don't transfer knowledge and we don't check understanding. And I think many of us who have been teaching for years will know that the way we check understanding has changed, but also the idea of understanding, of memorization, of how learners absorb knowledge has changed. So I just want to invite you to comment on any of those questions that I put forward.
Yeah, thank you. I don't know. I think I don't think learning has changed, and I think maybe we think that learning can be easy, but often we talk from a very privileged position. I mean, I went to school during a time before AI and before digital technologies, so I didn't have any of that. I've been reading, writing. So I know all of this. But what is happening to students today who don't have that? And I'm not saying that AI necessarily is a bad thing in all cases, but I think that learning and knowledge is about also repeating something, to read a text several times. But do we allow that time in our own teaching practice? I was just thinking about it because we've been talking for a long time about how students don't read long texts. So this isn't new, but now they have AI that can summarize those texts that we want them to read, and even creating even shorter summaries that are often completely full of flaws, and they're not trustworthy. So I mean, I've started to think about this, that how often do I actively work with reading assignments in my courses, and how do I support students? And I mean, I don't have a good answer to this, but I think there are so many things we do in education that we don't necessarily reflect on, and we become just surprised that, okay, well, why don't students do this? Well, have they been doing this for these past years? Because I'm not so sure. I mean, we have seen these issues before, and partly it's because we also have education that is sort of, the conditions are not very sustainable. We have too much work and too little time with students and all that. So I think the conditions are also important to also keep in mind, that we are not, it's not just our classroom or my classroom, it's everything. And fighting against this organizational conditions can be really tiring and difficult. And I mean, I come from Finland, so I have a lot of freedom to do what I want to with my students. I can assess them in any way I want. But I think a lot of Danish educators here, they might have a completely different way of viewing assessment. And in Finland, we've used a lot of written assignments. And I don't know about the rest of you, but I've sort of brought in more and more oral assignments also because I want students to talk about what they know. I don't think it's enough that they just write it. I want them to think about it and talk about it with me.
Yeah, I mean, but from personal experience, I know that in Cyprus and in Greece, university degrees are heavily regulated. But these regulations are regulations that were drafted in the 90s, and perhaps they involve a lot of assignments and written exams, which for a very long time we thought as outdated, and now they're back in fashion. I want to bring in. Some of the questions that colleagues are asking in the chat. One is by Andrea, and it's a question that's I mean, you've touched on feedback and how important feedback is, and maybe we have to go a step back and think about assessment. So Andrea is interested in alternative exam formats besides written or oral exams, and thinking specifically about the bachelor course. And then Jens is asking how big the share of your students are who are skeptical about using AI. And I think it's a question that concerns us all, and I'd love to hear from everyone in the webinar about what their students think about using AI, because I think our assumption is often that everybody's like, loves it, and then perhaps it's a wrong assumption. But let's start. Do you have any alternative exam assessment formats?
Well, I mean, I don't know. I love trying out new assessment methods. So I have my friend and a colleague. She used case-based assessment where students came on site, but they got a case, and then they were supposed to solve that case in a smaller group. I think they had 3 hours, and then that's one of I don't remember if that was the only assessment method, but I think it was the main assessment method. I've also asked students to create workshops. It can be a more dramatic assessment methods to include also some kind of role playing and in the presentation. But basically, I think I often played with either, these written and what I've done myself is that I have pretty short written assignments these days. And I don't know, but I feel like students are perhaps less eager to use AI in these type of assignments, and obviously asking them to reference texts.
Mm-hmm.
But
group work often does that.
Yeah.
Students are, they might individually be using AI, but when they have to discuss with others, they seem to be getting enough out of each other. That's also been my experience.
Yeah, and I've been using flipped classroom in many courses lately, and I feel like, especially in distance courses, I feel it's really good because it focuses our time together. And I mean, there are so many good models for flipped classroom, but it's also a way to provide them feedback, but also assess them throughout the course, because I'm getting also worried about the whole idea that everything sort of has to happen at the end of the course when it comes to assessment, because a lot of students are really stressed at the end of the term. So I've started building my courses a bit differently to provide also feedback and provide several opportunities to show what they're doing and what they're learning. So I don't know. I'm sorry, I don't have a lot of innovative methods.
No, that's very, very helpful. Thank you. And what would the share of your students, what would you say? I know this is not maybe an easy question to answer, but how many of your students would you say are skeptical about using AI? Because in my experience, I have heard students who say, I don't use it because it's unethical, because it's run sort of big corporations that also support very horrible things. But I have to say, it's again, anecdotally, it's a very small percentage. What's your experience, Charlotte?
I think I would say perhaps, if I'm guessing, but I think I would say like 10% are very, very skeptical. And this is also interesting because, I mean, why do you can't really force students to use generative AI, because if you turn the table, so to speak, what's the argument? Why should they be forced to use generative AI when we see that it actually can hamper their learning?
Yeah.
So there's just so much in all of this. I mean, what can we ask students to do? What can't we ask them to do? And is this actually, I mean, some researchers say that it's the young students who will lose job opportunities because, you know, the older employees, they have the knowledge, they have a position at you know, a company, but then all these young people, they won't have the skills necessary to get a job. So I mean, this is really not, it's I don't know, I think I'm painting a really bleak future. I don't know, maybe people are getting depressed from hearing me speak, but I mean, there's
People have
just so
been
much we
teaching
also need
distance
to talk
learning
about with the
education for years.
students. I think this is not easy. This is not an easy solution.
Yeah, it's not, because I very much agree with the point you made in your presentation, that we shouldn't disadvantage students who are not good at using AI, or who don't have the tools, whether those are like social tools or the financial ability or exposure. Students from you know, different backgrounds or different cognitive abilities, access to technology, but then incorporating it as a skill we teach our students in class is probably very useful. But then what do we do with students who do not want to use it? Are we forcing them to be doing this? And then what's our justification for it? Have we all agreed that this is important? And perhaps this is something for the teacher to agree with their students. And perhaps this is yet another reason why we should be running these democratic classes. But then we're also, as educators or as people in the business of offering distance learning education, we have to be transparent. We have to be open at the point of registration with our students that we are using this, and you know, if you do not want to, then you know, look for elsewhere, which again has its problems.
Yeah, and I mean, that is so important, that the trust. I mean, a lot of students are afraid that teachers are using AI, and that they're not getting the human feedback, they're getting the AI feedback. So, I mean, this distrust is not good for education. We need to be, like you said, we need to be transparent, and you know, yeah, I don't have a good answer to it, but I think we need to be transparent and be careful if we use AI. So I usually put some kind of note somewhere that I've used AI to structure this assignment, but I've stopped using them because I don't find AI that useful. So I think the hype around AI is that it makes everything more efficient, and I'm not so sure it does. Some things maybe, but a lot of things are just, you know, I just have to redo what it does. And I think the students might realize that as well. Plus, they're not necessarily learning what we're hoping they're learning. So this is, yeah, it's tricky.
There's a few more comments and questions in the chat, but I just wanted to take this opportunity to say that we will be returning to some of the questions you put forward, Charlotta, in October, when we have our concluding webinar, which is provocatively titled "The Inhumanity of Learning." And I think many of us at EADL and I'm sure Fluid are using AI and are very interested in how AI can improve education. But as educators and as critical thinkers, we're also here to ask questions that cannot be easily answered. Andrea Federson says that AI can be very helpful with feedback, and I think this is something you touched on, which perhaps relates to how modern universities have become, providers have become perhaps too focused on the quantity of feedback as opposed to the quality, making us as teachers basically working like full time as feedback providers.
Yeah, and I just want to say that, I mean, you can develop an AI model that is not unsustainable. I mean, basically, you can develop good AI models that also help help students, especially in distance education, because we know this. We know students, they have a lot of questions. Those questions can come, whenever they study, so the teacher can't be available. So in that case, I think it's really a good idea to have that kind of AI companion to help the teacher. But the problem is, if they're unsustainable, if they're unethical, then I don't think we can use them. We need a better solution for education then, that works with our values and that supports students, not discriminates against them and hurts them.
Mm-hmm. Great. I'm sure we could spend many more hours, days talking about AI, and of course, it's not a theme or a question that will go away, or that we want it to go away. So I'd like to thank you again very much, Charlotte. I'd like to thank everyone for being here, and I want to invite the EADL president, John Trussler, to say very few words.
Okay, thank you, Christos. Charlotta, thank you very much for that. I think it's the start of a process of us discussing, the ways in which AI can be used, and something which raises a whole. I mean, your presentation raises a whole lot of issues that a lot of us are grappling with every day. We use AI in small ways, to help us generate content, to support students and so on. But it's important to step back and think about the bigger picture and what the overall perspective is in terms of learning. And I think that's an ongoing conversation. And I hope that all of the participants will join us in our next series of webinars to carry on that conversation. I also think, we've looked at the innovation aspects of it and how it's been involved in teaching. I mean, it's something that EADL has been doing. And I would just prompt people who are here to think about what innovations they're using this year, and to come forward to us and maybe make a submission for a Needle Innovation Award. So a big thank you to you anyway. It's been great. And thank you to all the participants. We look forward to seeing you again at the next episode. And please keep in touch with the EADL. And a big thank you to Fluid for all of the people who have come from Denmark. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a good Easter.
And you.